and do the Father's will, not his own, and believe from day one on. What they did wrong, he did right. Out of Egypt have I called my son. Picture of Israel, picture of Yeshua, whose parents fled to Egypt after Herod's dictate to kill all the boys. And he became the picture. If they would look to him and they would have seen the stories, and all from, especially the beautiful stories in Genesis about Joseph, the 11 brothers, selling him off, only to find out that his rejection in a foreign land, ending up in a foreign prison, in a foreign country, becomes their salvation later on. All a picture of what God's Son, the Messiah, would be. Not just come as king, but he would come as a son who did the will of the Father in obedience and submitted him to the Father. He became one of them, born as they were born, as a man, in the same lineage of them, line the tribe of Judah, to show them that God loved them and hadn't cast them off, and has a plan and a way for them to live as he wants them to live, and that would be as an obedient son. Amen. And that comes through what he calls the second birth, the new birth, being born of the Spirit, because physical genealogy alone won't produce the life of God in a man, but the life of God in the man has to come through the interaction between two wills, the will of the God who loves you and the will of the creation, the created being, responding to that, reciprocally saying, yes, Lord, you are the God. I want your life. Take my life and make it yours. And you become born of the Spirit. I want you to go with me to Hebrews chapter 2 in the New Testament, and this will help put it in some good perspective. Hebrews chapter 2. About what? The Lord, the Son of Man, called the writer to Hebrews. Some think it was Paul. I don't. I think that if you study this book, and you will find that just from the grammar and the vocabulary are way different than the Apostle Paul would have written. But he was definitely a Hebrew believer who understood very well and knew very well the Hebrew scriptures and the Hebrew tradition of the sacrificial system. Some think it was either Barnabas or Apollos. And that's on case one. I think the study notes on the NIV Study Bible present the several different options of who might have wrote this book and favors Barnabas at that point. But anyway, chapter 2, look what it says in Hebrews chapter 2, I'm going to begin in verse 9. But we see Jesus, Yeshua, to the Jewish people, who was made a little lower than the angels. There's humility. He takes on, just him becoming man and taking on humanity, the infinite God, eternal God, taking on the form of a finite human, which has limitations, makes him, in a sense, lower than the angels, who still have personality, but they have the ability to move from here to here at the speed of thought. And he takes on the limitations of humanity, which is an act of humility, according to Philippians chapter 2. We see him now we're talking about after his death, burial, and resurrection. He's ascended into heaven, gone back to be with the Father. Now we see him crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. In bringing many sons to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the author of their salvation perfect through suffering. Both the one who makes men holy and those who are made holy are of the same family, so Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers. Therefore he says, I will declare your name to my brothers. What a picture of Joseph with his 11 brothers, who sold him off to die, rejected him, wanted nothing to do with him, only so that he could be raised up because of his suffering and rejection, being accused of what he didn't do, that God would raise him up in a foreign nation to bring them back into the fold later on. Sounds a lot like God's plan of redemption through eternity, all pictured in the first book of the Torah. Right?
Amen.
And he says, I will declare your name to my brothers. Joseph could be sitting at the table speaking to his 11 brothers. In the presence of the congregation, I will sing your praises. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, he says, here am I and the children God has given to me. Yeshua saying to God the Father, here am I. I have come to do your will, not my own. And I have given myself to do your will, Father, not for any benefit of my own, but so that others would come in. And like me, the Son, there would be a plurality of sons, and there would be a family of sons and daughters who are called by his name. That's his purpose, to bring many sons to glory.
Yeah.
And that is accomplished in nothing else, not the hard works or the great willpower of the congregant, the person who comes in with the sacrifice, because there's no sacrifice that could be made that was possible for him to bring with his sin that'll cover it. God had to provide the lamb.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Isaiah said was going to happen. God provides the lamb.
Yeah.
Right? So that the Son could present to the Father those who came to him. All that come to me will come to me because the Father has given to them.
Yes.
And Father, you have given them to me.
Hallelujah.
John chapter 17, the high priestly prayer of Jesus before he goes to the cross. And I give them back to you. Keep them through your word. You have given them to me, and I have kept them safe. And I have given them your word. Now you keep them as I come back to you.
Yeah.
And sanctify them in your truth. Your word is true. And he gives back to the Father sons. There's going to be a bride, and there's going to be a family of people who know him and who love him. And that is what we look forward to. There's going to be a wedding feast. That's the climax of history. Not the Battle of Armageddon. The wedding feast is the climax, where all creation waits and longs longingly to see who are the sons of God. That's like all of the congregation sitting and waiting as they see the bride coming up the aisle, and everybody turns around and look at the back. What does she look like? Who is she that he loves so much that he gives his own life for? All of creation waits and longs to see the one whom he loves.
Yeah.
And he loves you that much today. That he wants to call you his son and his daughter. And that he's building you up to be his bride. I want to share a story with you that, being able to understand the Scriptures, see the Old Testament in light of the New, just opens up the door of our understanding more than anything. And to understand the New Testament in light of the Old opens up our understanding. And we appreciate, the way that our Savior Jesus spoke to like the woman at the well, and when he gave himself to these people, remember he told the woman at the well, who's part Jewish and part Gentile. That's what the Samaritans were. They were half-breeds, and she gave her list of objections, and well, what about this? What about that? How come there's so many religions in the phone book? And how do I know which one's right? You do this, we do it this way, you do it that way. And he says, the day is coming when all those who come to God will worship him in spirit and in truth, and it's not going to be about this way or that way, or what the ceremony is, except for the ceremony means nothing unless it represents something bigger that's happening that you can't do. And that's why the law was given. And he tells the woman, but still make no mistake of it, that salvation is of the Jew. Because it was, and Paul elucidates this in Romans 9, 10, and 11, when he when he, after explaining the gospel to the Roman Christians, he has this little 3-chapter parenthetical passage in there. Well, what about the Jew now? And what about the Jewish nation? And where do they fit in now that the church is what God is doing on the earth and he's gathering all people in Jesus? He answers that. And he says in Romans 9, verses 4 through 9, but because it is from the Jew that salvation comes, that from the Jew God gave birth to sons. He sent his seed. He sent his promise. He sent his Spirit. He gave us the scriptures through the Jewish prophets and through the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is the way God chose to reveal himself to man so that we would have an address.
Yeah.
This is what I tell the atheist. How many pieces of information does it take to reach one person on this planet if you were to take a letter, put it in an envelope, and address it, and send it to somebody? 8 billion people on this planet. And if I added first name, second name, address, number, street, city, state, zip code, there might be 8 or 9 pieces of information which would identify 1 out of 8 billion. And God has left us 200 to 300 pieces of information of who Messiah would be, where he would be born, how he would live. The chances that anybody other than Jesus of Nazareth would be that one would be astronomically ridiculous. God made it and left it to no chance that we would know and that the Jew wouldn't know who was their Messiah. They wouldn't miss his calling. And it was from him and through him that together they'd come and make one new man. About 2 years ago, my wife and I sat at dinner with her company. We used to call them Christmas parties. Right now they're holiday gatherings. And her company she worked for at the time, she's no longer there now, but about 2 years